Welcome to the podcast, Your Future in Sales and Marketing, a podcast that helps you make great career decisions. My name is Mike Dickson and I'm a professional sales and marketing recruiter. I love what I do, but my biggest frustration is seeing too many people not realizing their career potential. In this podcast, I'll introduce you to my network, an amazing group of business leaders in the biggest tier 1 organizations through to some super fast growth SMEs. They'll share their career journey and give you unique advice and insights on managing your career and leading a function and a business. Join me, Mike Dickson of AXR Recruitment and Search, to help guide your future in sales and marketing. In this episode, we meet John McLoughlin, CEO of the Advantage Group. John talks with passion about the importance of engagement in the relationship between retailer and supplier and the impact an individual NAM and category manager can have on a tag score. Enjoy. Well, hello and welcome back to the Sales and Marketing Director Incubator, everybody, the program that helps you make great career decisions to maximize your potential. My name is Mike Dickson. I'm the Director of Sales, Marketing and Category here at AXR Recruitment and Search. And today's incubator, we have John McLoughlin, the CEO of the Advantage Group. Welcome, John. How are you this morning?
Nice to meet you along.
Fantastic. I think for some reason we managed to put you on mute there for a second, John, but you're back on now. So classic. And it's nice to see some sunshine in Sydney, which is, for those of you who are in Sydney, you're probably going, this is great. And apparently it's here to stay for a few days. So we're looking forward to that. Now, John, we've asked every guest the same question to kick off the incubator this year, which is, what's your favorite brand? And you've I normally have a caveat because we're talking to people who are running FMCG businesses. We say you can't pick your favorite, but your current business. But I guess you've got a wider remit. So what would you pick?
Look, I'm definitely a brand lover. So the wider question would be, what brand would I pick for what occasion, really? But given we've only got 45 minutes this morning, I'll tie one which is very much linked to my passion. So I'm a surfer, and there is a relatively famous surfboard shaper called McTavish. So he's a guy called Bob McTavish, and he was an original one of the 60s kind of longboard shapers. And he's works out of Byron Bay, and has just got a tremendous story behind his brand, but really just makes absolutely beautiful boards. And they just look beautiful. They perform brilliantly, but they look beautiful. It's real craftsmanship, still hand-shaped in his factory out of Byron Bay. And so it's tied kind of to the passion that really brings me a lot of joy. I'm not a brilliant surfer, but I actually love doing it and love getting it out there. And so that's my favorite brand.
Fantastic. I wasn't expecting that one, but maybe I should do, because the question that I normally then ask is, what's your passion? But I know what you were going to say for that anyway. So it's it's probably why you live in North Cornwall near me.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those things. It's funny, actually. I think that as you get a little bit older, you sort of think about, what are you still going to be able to do, And one of the things about surfing is you look around, and there's lots of old guys in the 60s and early 70s who are still surfing. So it's one of those things that's relatively gentle on the body that you can still do for a long time. And I think the thing, you're on your own progressive journey with surfing, which is beautiful. And some days it can be really humiliating, and other days it can be really kind of inspiring for you. So it just brings me a lot of joy. It takes my mind off things, and something you can do with your mates, you can do with your kids. But it brings me a lot of joy.
I like that. My passion's golf, and I was kind of listening to you talk there, thinking, there's some similarities there, but I think golf brings more frustration than joy. So surfing's probably got a bit more karma and calming effect about it.
Yeah, they can be equally humiliating, let me tell you. But yes, I think I played a bit of golf in my time as well, and it was the frustration that killed it for me.
Yeah. Cool. Guys, for those of you new to the incubator, we've got a chat facility. You are welcome to ask questions as we go. Just type anything you want, and I'll try and build it into the conversation between John and I. We're here for 45 minutes, so feel free to jump in anytime. Now, let's get into it. We're going to talk a lot about the Advantage Group today. John, you've run it in Australia since about 2006, and I think internationally over the last couple of years. But we want to talk about the evolution of the organization for sure, but I'm interested in your career pathway prior as well. For those of you probably just know you as Mr. Advantage in many respects, but let's talk a bit about life before. So summarize, I guess, where did you start and and what was the pathway before Advantage?
So mine's been quite an interesting pathway. I'll give you the real quick summary, which was I left school at 16 and I actually joined the army, which you can do in the UK, or you could do in the 80s when I joined as well. And my whole kind of, I wanted to travel the world. That was my sort of underlying motivation. I actually didn't do too much homework because at the time, the British Army was in Germany or it was in England. So those were really the only choices. But as a working class boy from Manchester, I wasn't kind of thinking much beyond getting out of my suburb, really. Yeah. I did that for 3 years. I enjoyed that. It wasn't for me long term, precisely because it wasn't going to be able to tick my see the world boxes. But it taught me a lot, and it kind of gave me some good skills about being independent. And actually, I remember going for my first sales rep job. I'd sort of realized coming out of the army that that wasn't the career that I wanted to follow. I read a great book called The Right Way to a Good Job. And actually that was really all about distilling down what you thought you were good at in terms of your personality traits and, some testing and that kind of stuff, and how that could be applied in the real world. And so I came up with sort of sales, something in and around that area. And I still think those insights hold true today, actually, but I came out with that. And as a result, I looked to some of the fast-moving consumer goods companies. They were really at the glamorous places to be then, sales reps for a consumer goods company. And I was lucky enough to land a role. And I actually think a lot of the skills that I'd learned in that 3 years in the army just helped me to shine during the interview process. A lot of other people had degrees, had sort of better education than I had, but I was able to land a role as a sales rep. And interestingly enough, that then allowed me to sort of take a career internationally and really see the world, because it was with a global organization. It was Coca-Cola. Within a couple of years of sort of working locally in and around the UK, I was able to get on the management trainee program, the international management trainee program, which again was really interesting. So they sent me to Egypt, first of all, as an international posting. And whilst I was working in Egypt, they worked really hard to send me to Arabic classes. And so basically I spent a lot of the time learning Arabic, which I thought was great. Again, I wasn't thinking too many steps ahead, because the next place they sent me to was Yemen. And that really, as a 22-year-old, I was absolutely on the edge of the world in a country like Yemen, living there. So now I realized why they taught me Arabic, and I needed to use the language. And then from there, I sort of bounced around the Middle East a little bit, places like Saudi Arabia, Dubai, Bahrain, which are all very different than they were sort of kind of 30 years ago now, but very interesting places to be, a real adventure, really challenging just in the environment to try and do work in those areas and sort of build your career, before eventually I landed in Australia again, still working for Coke. So a long career with Coke. And it was at that point where I think the blessing of being in a business that could take you anywhere in the world became a curse, because I fell in love with Australia. And so I realized that this was a place that I wanted to stay. And really, Coke's one of those businesses that's fantastic if you do want to keep traveling, but sometimes it's more difficult if you want to stay in a place. And that's where I decided to really make the change. I'd done an MBA at the time, and again, something that Coke supported and paid for, really opened my eyes up to doing things differently. And I was interested in a much more entrepreneurial challenge, which was then when I founded Advantage, or opened up Advantage in Australia.
Fantastic. I'm always intrigued by people's stories. I didn't know. I knew a bit about yours, John, but I didn't know the army piece and the Yemen and kind of life forming parts of your of what you've done now. So you formed effectively a Start Advantage in Australia. What was it like back then? Did you have a kind of a strategic plan that you wanted to achieve, or what were the goals in the early days?
You know, it's interesting because, again, fresh, having sort of recently finished an MBA, you think you've got a strategic plan. And I think it's Mike Tyson who says everybody's got a plan in a boxing match until the first punch gets landed. And I think it was very similar for me. I had this kind of big strategic plan. I thought a lot. One of the things that I thought a lot about in terms of leaving Coke, because it was a big decision. I was in my early 30s, and it was just a fantastic company to work for. Great people, and you were always intellectually challenged. You were always engaged in that business overall, and lots of Coke alumni will speak highly about the business. And so it was a big deal to leave. And I think the challenge for me was, first of all, getting my head around that and what that would mean. And one of the great exercises for me was actually, as part of the MBA, they made you write your epitaph, right? So when you die, what are people going to write about you? Or write your own. What would you like people to write about you overall? And I think that was really powerful for me, because a lot of the things that I wrote about, I then came to the conclusion that I couldn't actually fulfill those whilst I was working at a business like Coke. So I came to the conclusion, the sort of self-insight, that I was climbing a mountain, but I was on the wrong mountain. And therefore, even though I was climbing that mountain, it was great, it was challenging, it was actually leading me further away from the place where I was meant to be. And so as a result, I really thought about the entrepreneurial element, the control, really, probably less about entrepreneurial, but more being in really absolute control of my destiny. And on a day in and day out basis, spending 90% of the time using the skills and capabilities that I love to use, that brought me joy, and that I felt that I was good at overall, was how I came to that decision. And that really landed me in the sort of, right, well, I think consulting advice sort of space is going to be a good space for me. And then really I was looking for ideas in and around that space. So I was able to narrow it down. Advantage, I was aware of. I'd been in touch with the founder, who was based out of Canada, and we talked a couple of times. And they basically said, look, we've got no representation in Australia, we've got no representation in Asia. So how about you kind of think about seeing what you can do and kicking off in Australia overall. So that was the essence of how we started. So
it's pretty broad opportunities, nothing there. You knew about it. You felt there was an opportunity. Did you, when you look at Advantage today, and we'll talk about that in a second, but was Advantage back then doing the same things, or just on a smaller scale?
Oh, look, I mean, it didn't. So it was established in North America, US, Canada. It was established in Europe. Very much as what I'll say is, I would say it was established as a sort of retailer supplier feedback survey in those markets. Then it was just kind of unheard of in Australia at the time. It was an interesting time in retail in Australia as well. Sort of 2008, 2009 was very much just when John Durkin had arrived at Coles. And actually, in many ways, the last thing on people's mind was collaboration. It was the exact opposite in terms of the market was being shaken up, definitely, as far as the whole retailer supplier dynamic was concerned. So not necessarily ideal timing to try and come in with a tool to measure supplier satisfaction with retailers and retailers with suppliers, but it was the idea that I had and the idea that I wanted to go with.
Well, fantastic. And if you were to, for those who don't know, I presume everybody does who's on the call, I hope, but describe Advantage today, John, in terms of what it stands for, what it does. We'll maybe look at it from a global point of view and a local point of view.
Yeah, sure. I mean, at the heart the purpose of Advantage is really helping businesses work better together. So we've got a relatively narrow remit now in the sort of retail suppliers, which is where a lot of our business comes from. The majority of our business comes from today, but that doesn't mean the idea is not applicable anywhere. So I liken it, when I try and describe it, I liken it best to employee engagement. Employee engagement as a concept, everybody kind of understands. Why do you have engaged employees? Because they're better at problem solving, they're more loyal to you, they're more productive, better at collaborating. So nobody argues with it. It's a kind of done deal. The idea of employee engagement was only sort of launched in 1993. And so it's a relatively new concept, and yet now it's ubiquitous around the world. I think sort of 90% plus of companies over $10 million globally have some form of employee engagement. Well, Advantages in the world of business-to-business engagement, and often and it's anchored in this sort of retailer supplier space because there's a natural fit for it. But retailers can't be successful without suppliers. Suppliers can't be successful without retailers. And actually, the start point between them has all been will be negotiate really hard. Like it's almost like some one-shot game. You're going to win a negotiation, and great, you're going to win for this year. Whereas typically, the individuals work with each other for 3 or 4 years. There's some people who've been working on Woolies business for 20 years. There's people in Woolies who've been working with Unilever or Coke for 20 years. Like these are long-term relationships. So long-term relationships are absolutely got to be based on trust. And at any one point in time, to get the best out of the other party, they've got to be engaged in your business overall. So we're in a game of turning this whole thing about this almost adversarial nature of things, saying, well, it's about getting the best deal out of them, to actually turn around and say, well, actually, it's not. It's about getting the highest level of engagements out of them, because that will translate through loyalty to your business. That will translate through investment in your business. That will translate through to innovation within your business overall. And often I'll talk to my retailer counterparts. I'm asked to present to retailers, and they'll kind of go, look, we're busy enough keeping supermarket managers happy. Now you want me to keep my suppliers happy. And I'll turn around to them and say, look, you're only as good as the account manager that walks out of this door. And to what extent does that account manager walk away with real clarity on what you're looking for, an understanding of your strategy, and actually a motivation to really go back to their business and fight for resources to come back and channel those resources back into your business. So you're actually in the game of winning the game of hearts and minds in the same way as a retailer, you're winning your suppliers' hearts and minds. As a supplier, you're winning your retailers' hearts and minds. So it's a fantastic space to be in. Yeah. It's a really positive space. It is all about kind of better. And as a result, I never get bored of it.
It's interesting. I hadn't thought of it in those terms, but it makes perfect sense. So the advantage is measuring that, John. So you get a score based on that relationship. And I'm right in saying it goes both ways, right? You measure the retail performance as well on behalf of the supplier. Yeah, good. And do you see trends that drive scores come in one year and go away the next, or do you see the same things happening every year?
No, it absolutely evolves. So there's a couple of things at the play. So first of all, I mean, the great thing about Advantages is it's the one thing that we do, and we've been doing it for close to 40 years now. So we've learned a lot along the way. And I think certainly one of the things that I've been trying to do while I've been in a leadership role is really build on our behavioral science, our understanding of just how teams behave and kind of what drives results overall, and really think differently about the type of research and the research that we've got in place. So the first thing that I've got to do is really get people, and I'm evangelistic about this idea of engagement, right? It's kind of, that's what I've got to, whether you choose Advantage or not, right? Really start to measure this concept of engagement with your key business partners, because that's really the route to success overall. And then underneath that, what are you actually measuring, and what are the tools? And then actually what I find, there's a lot of companies in research, or there's a lot of ways to approach this through the tech as well. There's some amazing tech out there which produces beautiful dashboards and does it all in really nice ways. But what I find is that it's the advice. It's really they want the metrics. So they want to know you've got good methodology, you're researching the right people. then they want to know that you're measuring the right things. But really, where the rubber hits the road is the advice, because it's giving them confidence to act. And again, that's one of the most enjoyable things that I've really just got drawn a lot of pleasure from my clients and working with my clients over my time with Advantage overall. And so, what changes? It depends upon the environment at the time. We're going through a supply chain crisis. And so what supply chain is really important. So anybody can tell you supply chain is really important. So it's kind of, what's going on underneath there that really makes the difference overall. What we've seen certainly through COVID, where supply chain has obviously been kind of hit and disrupted, and now this ongoing disrupted environment that people find that it's really about one of the key things is less about the pure measures of what's my DIFOT score, right? Supply chain people will talk about days in full on time, and retailers will say you need to be 98%. And much more about, geez, we've got this existential crisis. How are our teams working together? Are we sharing the right information? Are we collaborating? Are we being proactive? Are we being reactive? Have we got subject matter experts in place to really be managing this on a week in and week out basis, so that we end up with products on shelf? And that takes real partnership, and that takes energy, that takes trust, and that takes overcoming challenges, because inevitably one side of the party will let down the other side of the party, and then where do you rebuild from there overall? As I often say to my clients, there's nothing more embarrassing for a category manager than not to have products on the shelf. And so you've really got to understand that and be empathetic and come from that perspective, and do whatever you can to make sure that either they're aware or that they can put alternative plans in.
A lot of people I talk to, John, I meet obviously organizations all the time as my clients, as a recruiter, helping them with their talent, or I'm interviewing candidates just to help them understand their career journey. And I often ask about their tag scores, and I sometimes find that some people are super aware, some feel more disconnected. How importantly do you think the kind of suppliers and retailer landscape in Australia, take the tag score? Is it something that drives their business?
Yeah, look, absolutely. I think that I've been really impressed with just how the industry has grasped the concept, held on to the concept. I'm continually humbled by the meetings that I get invited to, and the level of seniority that I get to share. So the retailers are very committed, and many of our retailers here in Australia have driven me to the next level by actually turning around and saying, look, we love your work, but you know what, the frequency isn't enough for us. So once a year we want this front and center. So for a number of our major retailers, we've designed custom programs which are about providing this information on a monthly or a bi-monthly basis. The audiences that I get and the boardrooms that I'm invited into, it's on the board agenda. It's very much seen as critical measures. Have we got great relationships? Are we doing the right things? How do our business partners see us overall? So it's been absolutely embraced by the industry in Australia. Look, we've been at it for 15 years here. As you know, as I said, I'm an evangelist about this, but I've been pushing through an open door, and we would deal with close to 200 of the consumer goods companies and all the major retailers now, and it's really embraced and really used.
Great. Question in from the chat, John from Aaron Costin. We'd love to get John's thoughts on elevating retailer conversations beyond supply discussions and CPI discussions that are currently dominating the grocery environment.
Yeah, look, I think that so look, that's a great question, and it can change, right? So we talked about supply. It was about price for a while. Now it's about kind of price inflation, and that's certainly there overall. Where I've seen now, so I think, let me answer this question with an example, and I'll see whether that lands for you overall. I had a business that was very much in a large player, consumer goods, and very much anchored in a discussion for a long time, which was all about you're below category average margin. So as a result, you're a business that's detracting from our performance rather than rather than attracting. And they were stuck in this dialogue. We didn't allow them to move forward. It was basically, we're putting you in this transactional box because you're not meeting our KPIs overall. Big business, very important business, but in that transactional box, it was getting in the way of relationships. It was getting in the way of innovation. It was getting in the way of any other conversations beyond that. And often in our FMCG world, we can find ourselves in those situations with certain retail partners at certain times. And this team really thought deeply, right from the top to the bottom. So first of all, the desire to sort of get a different outcome, and a desire to get a different outcome, which, you know, the whole business was going to be involved in, rather than just, hey, as an account manager, how are you going to get a different outcome? So this went from the kind of CEO down, and basically what they wanted to do, they went top to tops. They had top to tops planning, and they basically said, look, this is our opportunity to reframe what we are to this business overall. So we need to kind of acknowledge the average category margin piece, but we actually need to have a different dialogue about what we are to the business, and then actually what we can be from the business overall. And that was a very mature top to top conversation. It basically went from, hey, look at the contribution to dollar profit that we make overall. And rather than continually having this conversation that we've been on for 5 years and isn't getting us anywhere, why don't we just talk about how much more dollar profit we can overall? So we'll kind of tick this box. This isn't a kind of smoke and mirrors thing. We're going to grow your dollar profit. But in order to do that, we need an innovation agenda. In order to do that, we need an efficiency agenda for you. In order to do that, we need a contact strategy. In order to do that, we need the kind of right resources. And it was a complete unlock moment, though, this business, because the answer was, yes, we're really interested in this. We'll put some numbers around what we're going to do. But all of a sudden, people who were kind of walking in and not being able to give them the room to move, to create and grow together, were actually given the resources in the room to move, to create and grow. I can tell you that business got double-digit growth that year, went from number 15 in my survey to 2 years later being supplier of the year for that business overall, and has really stayed kind of right at the top in terms of that overall consistent performance. So a complete unlock. So what I would say in a short answer to the question, but giving you that example, is it's about thinking how you elevate the conversation, not just in terms of seniority, but actually in terms of a bigger picture. Yes, these are issues that we're dealing with today, but how do we look beyond that? How do we really reframe our partnership and what value can be created between us in this partnership, and get people excited about that?
Yeah, it feels like moving away from the transactional, the combative nature of the issue, to strategic what you can achieve together, which makes perfect sense. One of the things I often think about is, when you're in a large business, you're well resourced. You typically got insights teams, category teams, strong brand teams, innovation, larger customer management teams. Smaller businesses don't have that. They often have to play lots of different hats together. How do smaller businesses, or can smaller businesses with less resource score highly? Can they do well as well from a tag perspective?
Yeah, look, I think that you often, if you're in a smaller business, you often think the big guys have got all the resources and they've got all the plans, and if you're in a big business, you often think the small guys can be really nimble, and they don't have to deal with global, and they don't need sign off for things and that kind of stuff. And so if you're on the other side, you can see advantages in the other model and the disadvantages and in the reality of your model overall. And so I would, and we see that absolutely play out. I love, I'm a big fan of Lynn Radford's at Chobani, and that's an amazing story because I think it's an amazing story because Chobani was a little player. And I think they're only 8 or 9 years old. Lynn, sorry if I've got that wrong. But when they first came into the marketplace, they were basically a bottom-up entry into a very congested marketplace, 4 major dairy players. Yeah, the last thing that people were turning around and saying is, hey, the last thing that retailers were turning around and saying is, I need another yogurt supplier in this particular space. But they were able to come in, carve out the niche, and now they're a big player, but they were a small player. And I think that it's about playing to your strengths. And I know that's a cliche, but it's about understanding those strengths and playing to the strengths. And not actually assuming that you've got strengths out there that are strengths. If you're a global player, that's only a strength if you bring in global insight, global best practice, global innovation to your retail partners. If you're not doing any of those things, then it's probably a disadvantage because you probably are slower. You're probably a bit more cumbersome. You could potentially be more restricted in terms of, what you can do and how you can kind of lay things out overall. So there could be some inherent strengths there, but are you actually delivering to them? And there are advantages and disadvantages dependent upon scale, but that doesn't mean that there's not something there for everybody.
Yeah. We work very deliberately with a number of smaller businesses, as well as mid-tier transformationals and large tier ones. I think they all have something very different to offer. A lot of it's down to leadership. A lot of it's down to the strength of leadership and how they connect the people working for them with a clarity of vision. A big business can move quickly if it needs to, and if it's got a point of difference. A small business can be too slow, but I get stuck in their ways as well. But I think if you've got good leaders, you'll work very, very well. And I must admit, I love working with some of the smaller businesses we do, and some of them are real disruptors in the market. We've had a few of them on in this series already. People like Muti, who are doing incredibly well. Shine Energy Drinks doing very well. There's a number of great examples out there of small nimble businesses. But great. Can organizations make dramatic improvements in a tag score if they are languishing in the lower quartile? Is it a kind of a longer term plan that will get them up to the top quartile, or can they make big jumps?
What I would say is, and often we do see swings, and we do see some big swings in our data, and people are almost surprised to a certain extent of where those swings come from. And I actually turn around and say, look, the harder thing is consistency, and the harder thing is consistent good performance to achieve. So, we've had lots of kind of businesses that have come into the top third and then gone out of the top third on our benchmark sets over the years. But there are only a few that have really stayed consistent performance 5 or 6 years. It's hard to delight all of your retailers all of the time if you're a supplier, or it's hard to delight all of your suppliers all the time if you are a retailer overall, particularly in a competitive environment, and then particularly when you have so much disruption that's going on as well. So I would say some relationships and some, although we can bring a lot of metrics to bear, and businesses can bring a lot of metrics to bear within their own scorecards that they have with their business partners. But one of the hard things to turn around is trust. And when trust gets broken between organizations, and there's certainly, particularly in Australian retail, there tends to be people who stay around for a while, and therefore we'll work with individuals, but have an overall perspective on an organization and whether they can trust that organization overall, that kind of organizational reputation that sort of sits in there. So that can take longer to turn around. It's sort of a 2 to 3 year journey. But other things can change really quickly by, again, having that reframe, having that conversation, being transparent, being authentic about what you want to achieve, putting some things on the table, and just bringing that energy to the table as well. So you mentioned leadership before, but I actually think, particularly in retail supplier relationships, it's as much about category management on the retail side and account management on the supplier side, where that leadership comes from. Ultimately, they're representing their businesses, how they show up, the energy that they bring, the enthusiasm, the passion for the business can really make a difference to the overall perception of that business, far greater than you think it could do, actually.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting point, because I imagine a lot of people, particularly in the more junior levels, are thinking, well, what's, if I'm a national account manager, it's not that, it's a junior or mid-level role, but what difference do I make? And from what you're saying there, that the individual does make a big difference. It's not just, I guess it's an organizational effort, but the individual has a big say in that.
Absolutely, huge, absolutely. At some point in time, I remember a couple of years ago, I was sat next to Steve Donoghue, currently the CEO at Endeavour, but at the time he was running Woolworths Supermarkets, and it was a supplier of the year, and they made the announcement. So it was an individual account manager of the year award, and they made the announcement. And I said, "Oh, I'm surprised," because it was actually quite counter to some of the data that I had back from Woolworths. And Steve said to me, "Well, look, we know how hard this person works, and that's in spite of the business that she's working for." and we really wanted to reward her for that overall. And I thought that was it was really interesting insight that they recognise that sometimes people are working in big businesses, that those businesses can be quite cumbersome, but they're fighting, they're passionate. They really want to make a difference, and they can see that, and that comes through. So, I often sort of say in this place, it's all pretty transparent in terms of what's going on. You like to think you're positioning things in the way, but particularly on the retail side, they're seeing 20 suppliers a day turn up. They kind of get a sense of what's going on, where the commitment's coming from. They're continuously benchmarking. And so how you show up, what you do, the energy that you can bring can have a huge impact on the overall perception of you and your business.
Now, your role, John, takes you to other markets now globally within Advantage. A lot of mature markets that are probably have similarities in terms of the sophistication within the retailer and supplier environment. When you look at the Australian market from a customer and category perspective, where would you say we are from a talent perspective compared to, say, the States or Europe?
Well, look, I think one good measure of that is the extent to which we're exporting talent and and where that talent is. And I've been really pleased to see. So I've been doing the CEO role globally for 2 years now, and I've actually been really pleased to see how many Australians I'm bumping into who are now in big jobs in different areas around the world. So I think that's a measure of and just the talent that we've actually got in consumer goods in this marketplace. And I think I would also say that both on the retailer side, on the supplier side, our retailers now, I think 15, 20 years ago, Australia may have been considered a bit of a sort of backwater and less advanced in its retailers. I think now you would put many of our retailers up above some of the best in the world. You would put them in the best of the world. And I think the leadership that we've got in place is absolutely first class across many of our consumer goods and retail businesses here. And that's allowing people to really thrive. I think we're exporting talent, and I think Australia is a really interesting market. I think it's, big enough and consolidated enough that you can really make a difference and have a big impact, but not so sort of, people used to talk about the big monopolies and that kind of thing, and that can often lead to a bit of complacency. I don't think any of that complacency exists now. Yeah. I think businesses are working really hard, and it's resulting in real quality in terms of people.
Yeah, great. And in your time, do you think the role of national account management and category management has changed much? I've got a view in this, but and I'm very close to them as well. But you've got a different angle than I do. Have you seen that role, these two roles evolve a lot in the last 5-10 years?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. Look, I think I used to work closely with, it was Coca-Cola Amatil, Coca-Cola Europe,
Europe Pacific Partners.
Europe Pacific Partners now, and back when I was working in that business or working for the Coca-Cola company in the Australian business, they very much held the view, and I think this was very advanced at its time, that if you were an account manager, you were really a managing director of the business unit. If you're account manager of Woolies, you were actually the general manager. You were an MD of the business unit, and you had these you would pull on the different resources within the business to deliver an outcome through that business unit. And that's always stuck with me, because I think that's where the entire market has evolved to now. And that's the role of, don't think about yourself as an account manager, think about yourself as an MD for a business unit. Because ultimately, this isn't about you going in and selling the product. This is about you managing a relationship which involves supply, which involves long-term strategy, which involves category management, which involves marketing, and it's bringing all of those resources to bear. And landing those resources across the multiple stakeholders on the other side of the organization as well. So you're very much the kind of conductor of the orchestra, the managing director, the leader, than you are just dealing directly with your counterpart and selling a range of products for the year.
Yeah, we often use the phrase here at AXR as well, that you're the general manager of your customer. When we're looking at talent, we look for that enterprise-wide thinking, as opposed to somebody who just sits in their lane and looks at their role and in a linear fashion. I think it's why we encourage people from a career perspective to ensure that they get breadth, that they don't become the Woolies account manager for 20 years, that they actually work across as much of the business as they can, because that fundamentally makes them a better customer manager anyway. But I'd love just to kind of get a bit of advice and insight from you as well, John. There's a lot of people who are listening to the podcast that this comes out on Your Future in Sales and Marketing, as well as to jump on the live calls. They are naturally, by being connected to this, quite serious about how do they ensure their career keeps moving, that they get longevity, that they maximize their potential. When you look at that pathway to sales or marketing director, what advice would you give people in that junior to mid stage in terms of equipping themselves with the right experiences?
Yeah, look, I think if I reflect back on my own career, and I think that things have, if you like, the opportunities have opened up in front of me fastest and almost easiest when I've really had the right self insight. And so we often sort of think about this as an external thing, well, how do I actually, how do I move things forward, and who do I need to talk to, and how do I manage my brand, and, what experiences am I getting? But I would actually turn around and go, how honest are you? How well do you know yourself? How honest are you with yourself? To what extent are you being ego-driven in a certain area versus the things that really bring you joy? Right, that you really enjoy doing, that you kind of naturally good at. So I would really start there. And I say this from kind of personal experience, that the kind of day job of Advantage, which I've moved further away from now, given my kind of CEO thing, I'm still drawn back to and I still love, and I would still kind of do that. And sometimes people say, but you've been doing pretty much the same thing for 14 years, really? You're not getting bored of that? I'm like, absolutely not. It changes every day. The things change, people change, but it really brings a lot of satisfaction and stimulation to me overall. And I think a lot of that was about me really knowing myself and knowing what was really going to, where I was going to get joy, where I was going to get fulfillment from spending my time. And once I got those things actually locked in place, then the movement really came, the business success really came. Things really accelerated and came much more easily to me. From that perspective. So my start point for people would be know yourself, right? And really be on that continuous journey to understand. Now, you have to have a combination of experiences. So if you're relatively young in your career, try different stuff, do different things. But to chase experiences and chase development opportunities rather than chasing titles overall. And I think if you do that, then you'll get to understand yourself better. And if you understand yourself better, you'll be able to tune your unique sets and talents to something that's really going to help you be successful.
Yeah, it's amazing how many more people who are perhaps past the midpoint of their career are very comfortable with what you described there, but the view that they still want to chase experiences and titles become less important, whereas they seem at the more junior end of your career to be more defining. And it's changing. There's definitely, I think there's still, I think, too many people at that junior end are marking their success by their title and their salary, and it's just not that important. It's about one, as you say, knowing yourself and setting some kind of markers down the line in terms of your longer term goals, but having an open mindedness about how you're going to get there, and think about all the different experiences you can have rather than getting just fixated on one job title or one salary you want to reach.
Yeah, life's a long game, and Mike, you're of a similar vintage to me. I mean, a decade younger, I know, but you also realise that the last thing that you want to do is end up in your kind of 40s pursuing a goal that isn't really making you that fulfilled. And you can end up making that mistake if you go down the sort of title chasing route. Fulfillment it's not an easy, it's not talked about as a kind of great aspiration, but it's a very hard thing to achieve actually. And not everybody gets to do it. And that's a shame, because it can be a wasted career if you're not in that space. So I would urge people to focus on what brings them joy, what makes them happy, what they're good at. And they're the indicators that are going to lead you, much more than the sort of structural titles.
Agreed. Not everyone's going to be the CEO, and that's okay. But John, we're almost out of time. But finally, on you, what's next for you, for Advantage? What does the future look like?
Look, we've just got we've got an incredible future ahead. I've just been working on so my chairman actually is a big fan of Simon Sinek's The Infinite Game. And basically that book's all about, look, forget about the next 5 years. What does the next 50 years look like? How do you not think about just getting great results next year, but really building a business for the future? So we're in 40 countries around the world. 90% of our business comes from suppliers and retailers. Fastest growing part of our business is retail overall. But I think this concept of business to business engagement could be really ubiquitous. And I think Advantage is the business that has got the credentials, has got the behavioral science, has got the skills, and has got the people to be able to, really bring this whole better together concept to many businesses around the world, create a lot of value as a result of that, but bring people, if people are working with external parties in a much better way, and whether you're in marketing and there's an agency that you love working with, or whether you're in sales and there's a retailer that you love working with, it's great fun to be on teams with people who are on the same page and you're aligned with, and you can do great things. And that's the output of our work. We give people a measure, but in the end, it's about being able to build trust with people, build empathy, which is a really important part of it. And then as a result, behave differently with that team. And if you put that work in, you'll get great things out. So we want to be at the forefront of what is essentially an emerging area. And I've got lots of energy to be able to do that. Fantastic. Sounds like a good guiding principle for the relationship a good recruiter should have with their clients as well. But John, that's fantastic. We could measure that for you, Mike. Could you? No, there's a thing. That's a new area for you. Brilliant. John, that's been awesome. Really, really enjoyed the conversation. Thanks everybody for being part of the live session. John's our 53rd guest in the incubator. So we've been getting through some fantastic conversations over the last 2.5 years or so. And you can catch all the previous guests, including this episode, which will be on the podcast, Your Future in Sales and Marketing, next week on Spotify, Apple, Google Podcasts. If you like it, please subscribe and rate. It helps others find us. Now, next up in the incubator is Olivia Sutherland. Olivia is the marketing director of Krispy Kreme. Her husband, Andrew Sutherland, was actually a previous guest in the podcast, the first husband and wife partnership we've had on. Now, we're going to be exploring the role brand plays when a business like Krispy Kreme develops into a wholesaler as well as a retailer. So some really interesting stuff to get into there. I think most people are comfortable and familiar with AXR now, but we're very passionate about helping you guys make great career decisions and to understand your pathways. And for new listeners or those not yet connected with me and my team, reach out anytime for a conversation to help you establish your career goals and to access all the things we produce, salary guides, recruitment guides, or our monthly mailer, the Sales and Marketing Collective, which talks about who's moved where in the world of sales, marketing, and categories. So lots you can get access to. But John, thanks again for your time this morning. Thank you, Mike. And guys, we'll see you all back in the Sales Marketing Director Incubator in 2 weeks' time. I hope you enjoyed today's podcast from AXR Recruitment and Search. We're passionate about helping you get the most out of your sales and marketing career. Keep listening as we bring you more inspiring journeys and advice from Australia's sales and marketing leaders. You just can't get this career insight anywhere else. My name is Mike Dickson. See you next time on Your Future in Sales and Marketing.